Okay, so welcome to D365 Shot First. That's Charlie Rogers,
It's Phil Kameen.
and we are here talking today a little bit about releases and release waves and what's coming up.
What's
and
new?
What's new? What's in BC?
What's new with you?
What's new with me? Did you do any? I think we might have talked about this last time. Actually, did we do any New Year's resolutions?
No.
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 Oh, good.
I wanted to get healthier.
Did you
Eat healthier mainly.
eat healthier?
Yeah. I mean,
If that's the audio of that noise there is a plate of very nice looking chocolate chip cookies and biscuits being moved away from Charlie for the sake of his health. Well, it's normal custard creams actually, isn't it? So
It's the tough thing about working at home though, right, is you do just eat well.
do you eat well?
Yeah.
I try and think about it. I always try and make sure at least there's like a piece of fruit with lunch or something like that rather than being biscuits and stuff. I'm very much, let's not have biscuits, too many biscuits in the house, or crisps, because they're too easy just to grab and sort of...
Crisps I can quite happily leave.
Oh, right. Okay.
But biscuits are, like, because I have tea, as you know, I drink a lot of
You
tea.
drink a lot of tea.
It's very easy just to dunk away.
That's a Formous mug, but the mug that you actually came in today was about the size of your head.
It's a litre, yeah.
A litre of tea.
A litre flask.
Bloody hellfire. Yeah, I don't drink tea. I've been watching Ted Lasso, and I'm with Ted Lasso in that tea is disgusting, and it tastes like.
I thought we were friends.
Suddenly, I don't want to speak to you.
That's a rethink a couple of things.
Yeah, rethink a couple of things.
Anyway, what is new with CE? Is there anything, the new release wave? I know you've been...
I've scribbled a few notes here as well and done a little bit of perusing online and stuff. I normally don't get too het up about, seeing what's going on in the release waves. I think there's enough going on generally in the community in terms of what's in preview, what's been in preview forever and ever. I'm looking at low-code plugins and PowerFX stuff. So I don't normally get too het up on it because it tends to be, rather than just looking at the docs and going, okay, that sounds interesting, I tend to find that I look at it at somebody who's tried to use it in anger and gone, yeah, this is not working for me, or I found a really great way of using it. So there was, more recent, the last couple of months, I saw somebody had posted something about some of the new controls which came out last year, and they'd done some really nice stuff, nice UI bits and pieces, which ordinarily I'd have thought I would need to be using Canvas apps or something for. And they've gone, okay, well, actually, with a couple of JavaScript tweaks, then they can make it work inside a model-driven app. And so, it just means that your model-driven app's a little bit prettier and, and hangs together visually a little bit nicer. Whereas ordinarily you'd be, let's go and do a Canvas app and all the bits and pieces you'd need in order to do that. So
I was going to say, last time I played around with Canvas apps trying to get them to look pretty, I was trying to embed Canvas apps in model-driven apps.
Right.
And then use JavaScript to write over the top of it. So
it can be a bit of a headache in terms of putting all that kind of stuff together.
Yeah, safe to say that's the last time I used CE.
So Canvas apps being showed as, if you show them as something called a page in CE, then they appear more as a dialogue window. And the word dialogue was a word I was struggling for a little earlier, which was a specific technology that Microsoft introduced into Dynamics, which allowed you to run processes and basically, smart sort of wizard type interfaces. And you could do fetches in them and all sorts of neat stuff. And they got deprecated, I think, as part of the move across into the later versions of Windows, which meant, different React libraries and stuff like that. So the historical stuff was basically killed off. And they replaced it with this Canvas app stuff instead.
It's funny you mentioned wizards. In BC, they love a setup wizard.
They love a wizard. Everyone loves a wizard, right?
Yeah, it's just an easy click through, isn't it?
It's a great way of getting work done.
So they've deprecated that.
Oh, that got deprecated a while ago. Dialogues got deprecated a while ago. And then it's sort of about a couple of years ago, as they were being deprecated, everybody was like, well, okay, now you can replace those with, these things called pages, which are Canvas apps, but they're drawn up in a specific way. And so they have a little bit of knowledge about the context of the page that they're sat in, and so we can do bits and pieces. So we've used those quite successfully in a few projects. There are a couple of times they don't say there's bits of caching sometimes you've got to worry about and stuff like that. but most of the time they seem to work pretty well as a means of, sort of having a sort of an active wizard pop up, whereas, traditionally web resources, you could pop those kind of as a dialogue in the middle of the screen, but then you'd have to write a lot more code in order to drive it. So obviously when you're in a Canvas app, the theory is it's low code. Low code.
Obviously, with the dialogue of the page and things like that, and obviously with it having more knowledge, you're able to manipulate that more with CoPilot. Because I know in BC with the new releases, they've,
Right.
I think the whole of Microsoft and the world, especially recently with, the current AI coming
Yes.
out and things like that, there's a lot of
So
release waves involving CoPilot and BC, and I wonder how CRM is
yeah, with it.
handling that.
Well, that's it. I think they're sold now because you've got Power Platform sitting underneath everything. You've got a Power Platform release wave now. And I was looking at it earlier, and somebody was saying there are 311 mentions of Copilot in it. So it's a lot to sort of try and stay on top of, I think. Well, I pulled out a few of the key items. We've got some notes here. So one of the an interesting thing was process maps for multi-flow automations. So that kind of knocks the door on a little bit of what you do, I guess. So, if you're building a Power Automate flow, once it starts to become generally more than a page, like traditionally code, right? If a function or a method got to more than about a page long, you'd be saying to whoever wrote it, well, isn't it time maybe to break this into a couple of smaller parts? And I think Power Automate flows are in a similar vibe there. Generally, if you've got to scroll up and down a few times, and you've got to keep scrolling, then
Yeah.
you want to think about breaking it into bits.
When you've got to zoom out.
Yeah, when you got to zoom out and go. So it's interesting that their take on it is to go, okay, well, let's give something to help visualize it a bit more. And that kind of fits. There's a lot of tooling that's XRM Toolbox we've mentioned before. There are some bits and pieces in there which help you look at business process flows and link the business process flows through to the underlying processes. So that might be classic workflows or even Power Automate flows. So it's interesting how they steal bits of ideas and stuff. I suppose it's easier for Microsoft. It's always worth looking at what the community is producing to try and make their lives easier and go, okay, we need to roll that inside the tool itself. So
Yeah, I mean, it really deprecates the idea of needing to brainstorm when you can just go out into the forum and see what people are desiring so much that they're going out themselves to develop it.
yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
and when there's something missing in the platform that
Yeah.
is clearly such a requirement for.
So, are there any tools and bits and pieces produced by the community specifically for BC?
By the community, I'm not massively aware. I mean, we've got, I think there's like 6,000 different products released from ISVs
Right.
that, you can go into BC's, obviously got its own extension marketplace where you're able to literally just click install, download the module that, said ISV is created and therefore implement straight into the system, which is
Right.
great, right? I mean, 'cause it's 6,000 things, there's not much there that you're going
Yeah.
to look at and go, there's not something that we could use that's, easier, cheaper and quicker to
Yeah.
implement than...
Like that expense management tool we have.
Yeah, Continue, yeah.
Continue.
They've got a doc captioning too, as an OCR software that reads documents. So when they come in, you can just scan the document and it'll upload it as a digital copy to BC to,
Yeah.
remove that need for paper. And then obviously it works the same with digital things. So when you get digital invoices and things, it can just scan using the
Picks
OCR
up,
software.
OCR.
The,
There you go.
vendors amounts, VAT amounts. So it is very useful, right? And that's the thing. Like, why would we go out of our way as companies to develop that when
Yeah.
you can
And
just have an
worry about all the
ISV?
bugs and all the rest
All
of
the
it.
bugs, all the upkeep,
Yeah.
developing it in the first place, the initial cost.
Hmm.
When these ISVs are able just to license it to you, it's cheaper to our customers and easier for us as consultants. Because as you mentioned previously, right, when you're trying to keep up with all this thing, I mean, there's probably a new product released a day
Yeah.
on the extension marketplace. As a consultant, trying to keep up with released notes, just in general, especially coming in as a junior, trying to just learn
Yeah.
the
That's a
vast
lot.
amount that's in. I learnt CE for 6 to 8 months, and then I've come to BC and been on this for 6 to 8 months. So
It's a lot to pick up,
yeah,
isn't it?
trying to pick all that up. I mean, even with the experienced consultants that've been doing it 10, 15 years, over that I work with, it's like, how are you meant to keep up with the
Yeah.
amount that while doing your day job and still trying to do implementations, trying to keep up with the release. I mean, I'm looking at your notes there, Phil, and
Yeah.
even doing your day job, having a family, having a wife, trying to balance life between
Yeah, no, absolutely.
the community
Yeah.
and then doing community events is
Yeah, I'm always
another.
impressed that there's a lot of the community people who sort of, you know, throw evenings into it. The Birmingham UG was last week, and I was umming and ahhing about going, but on the Tuesday I'd been into London to go to the Bletchley AI user group, and so that meant sort of I wasn't home till sort of 10 o'clock in the evening. Granted, there was sort of 45 minutes of drinking a pint with people at the end, but
That's part
that
of the user group
that's part of the user
experience.
group experience. Absolutely, you should all do it. But yeah, it's quite a lot of time you could lose if you chose to. And it was interesting. So there was a guy named MVP earlier this year, Howdang, and he's a lovely guy. And I've met him at a couple of things. And I noticed he produces a weekly newsletter. And I think somewhere in there he'd said, I'm trying to cut down the amount of time I spend per day knocking things around on LinkedIn. So it can very easily start to become a little bit overwhelming. And I think I think we discussed this a little bit earlier about, sort of, you know, is there sometimes too much going on in the community, too much noise? Is it difficult to filter that out? And certainly, you know, I would say yes to an extent. I think you've got to sort of learn to apply your own filter to it.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Bletcher, I mean, Lewis, when he first became an MP, did 365 days of a blog a day.
Oh wow!
And there's things like that, and credit to him because I've, been trying to write some myself, and it's safe to say that that isn't an easy feat.
No, no. There's a lot of effort going in there. Each blog. Every time I write a blog, I'm like, because I'm always concerned. And the same way, if I'm standing up in front of people and talking or whatever, or even when we're doing webinars, for the business, I'm always concerned that. And what I'm saying is there validity to it? Is there truth to it? Is it just noise? Am I just regurgitating, a Microsoft website or somebody else's website? And so, sometimes you think, oh, do I need to back off from that? Otherwise, I'm going to, sort of burn out or whatever. So, it's something I think you've got to, I guess, if I was to think about it a bit more, I go, okay, maybe I should just be happier with the fact that I have a good core knowledge. And most of the stuff that comes along generally is not really a change to the core knowledge. It's all about, additions. So you're thinking of CoPilot, for example, and, there's a Dataverse connector, effectively a knowledge provider that's recently available for Copilot Studio. And I think it's part of release wave 1. And it's interesting that I suppose I take bits of my AI knowledge, my Dataverse knowledge, my CRM knowledge, if you will, and I throw it all into the pot in terms of then how do I deal with this? If I want to do something with Power Automate with that as well, then I take all these bits of knowledge and you throw them together in order to then use the new tool, hopefully, and get the best out of it. Whereas if you came in fresh and somebody said to you, hey, here's Copilot Studio, and by the way, you can talk to Dataverse, and you'd be going, well, what the hell's Dataverse? Then you'd have so much more to try and put together in your mind, sort of those paradigms, I think, which are important to build in your head when you're becoming a developer or a consultant, is terms of what is my mind model of how a system works, and what I'm doing, does that alter my model? And of course, when you alter that model, it's a lot of effort involved. Just like in real life, sort of, learning to drive, dealing with people. You end up with models in your mind of how this stuff works, and then when people do something weird, you've got to alter that. So it goes the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, right? Like you say, you've got to try and have a general knowledge. So when you get to the more senior roles, you can solution design, right? It's effectively what you're, trying to get at there is, you need to, when you get to a certain point, especially where you are now,
Yeah.
it's very tricky because you've got to have that core base and constantly keep relevant and up
Yeah.
to date with that core knowledge for all the releases. But then the things when they introduce things like Copilot and Copilot Studio and the connectors, if you're designing a technical solution, you've got to understand how all these things fit together.
How that were.
if you don't know, then
then you try and put a
yeah,
solution together and you present it to a client, and sort of, you'll have hopefully a lead technical guy with you as well, and they will go, yeah, it doesn't work that way, Phil, and I'll be like, hang on, in my mind, that was the picture I'd built up. Okay, how does it work? Can I continue to use it in this solution, or do I need to come up with an alternative? Is the alternative going to be expensive? Is there additional licensing? All that kind of stuff has to start running through my head. So it's tricky sometimes to make sure that your brain isn't doing too much of that. Otherwise, you lose your sleep.
yeah. I mean, that's what's crazy, right? Because like you say, I mean, I'm not sure how CE works, but with BC we have region-specific
Right.
tenants, effectively, within Azure and within BC.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know you guys have language packs and things like that, but I don't know whether.
Yes, but we also do have the different regions
Yeah,
where, so the customizations tend to come out in the States first and filter through across into the European regions and EMEA and everywhere else.
yeah. Obviously, for BC, a lot of that's for whether it's VAT or tax or a lot of
Yeah.
governments require. I mean, the French chart of accounts is very different to how we'd
Oh,
use
is
it
it?
traditionally in the UK. We've battled that recently, and
Wow.
and it's those challenges, right? Like where you're trying to keep up to date with the new things, but then you have new clients that come on board. Whether it's from Australia, France, Germany, or something like that, and you're like, it doesn't matter how much BC knowledge you have, if you're not from that place of
Not
residence,
local.
you're not gonna know their tax rules
Yeah, yeah.
and those things. And then you've got to get up to date. Is there a localization for BC available there that's got
Right.
the majority of this stuff as a base, or is it something that we're going to have to go and look? Because ISVs, I mean, this is one great thing. So we've done a few where they've got subsidiaries in Malta and things like that, and
Right.
obviously Malta's not a massive country, so there's not a localization
No.
there yet. But ISVs have produced
Right. Okay.
localizations there,
That's
so
interesting.
it's one of those things where you can work with other providers and ISVs and lock down these solutions. But it's similar to what you're saying there, where whether you haven't got to know all these releases, you've got to know what's available.
Yeah.
On a broader spectrum of things, you've got to know who's the providers, how to get in contact with those providers. Because I imagine, I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I imagine there'll be things on the extension marketplace that aren't actually available anymore.
Exactly. There'd
Of
be bits and pieces where, potentially the game, deprecation. So I mentioned
hmm
dialogues earlier, and, there's probably a few bits and pieces out there, and they will no longer work because they relied upon dialogues or a particular, data provider or something along those lines. But I guess that's, as much the nature of IT really, in terms of, suddenly a website disappears, for example. It's always been, the joke is, isn't it, that, there is no such thing as the cloud. It's somebody else's computer. So, and that's always going to be something that bites you at some point, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the toughest thing is, like you say, things will get deprecated, and then even with those, packages you just install into BC, they rarely fit exactly what you're
Right.
looking for. It's like we're working with some aerospace companies, and regulation and compliance features with audit logs
Right.
and documentation and drawings and all of that, combined. And then when you receive something, and when you do your warehouse receipt, and you put that through, and like the process of the aerospace companies are traditionally you inspect it before you take it into stock,
Okay.
because
Yeah,
obviously you
makes
don't want to take
sense.
it into stock and add it onto your balance sheet and
Yeah.
as an inventory part if it's not, if it's got a scratch on, or
Yeah. Yeah.
or if there's a nail missing or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Whereas the way BC works is you can't transact against it or send it back if you haven't received it.
Oh, okay.
So it's one of those things where it's entirely possible, but it's just a change of process. And
Yeah.
like installing these quality apps and things like that, you've just got to edit features to make them compliant with all the documents, and then, like you say, using Power Automate to try and connect these things. And then it's
Yeah.
like, do we have to do a plugin or something along those lines, or can we just? Is there a ready-built connector? The system is so massive. I think it's, as you say, good to be involved in the community. I think it's a really good thing to do, but sometimes when you're looking at trying to do more, you've got to really think, is this something that someone else can get or I can get from somewhere else?
Yeah.
And
No.
conserve your time to spend with your family and do
Yeah.
life
And
things,
have a life. Absolutely.
outside of work.
Yeah. It's really important.
And then, because I don't know, it's really tough. It's really tough
Hmm.
because you do need, like, I don't really believe in a work-life balance. I think at
Okay.
times you've got to,
Commit one way or the other.
yeah, you've
Right.
got to. There's always a variance.
Yeah.
and sometimes it's going to be adverse and sometimes it's going to be inverse, and you've just got to balance that variance between
Yeah.
sometimes you're going to have weeks away on client site, so you're going to be really busy at work and you're not going to get to see Mikey
Yeah.
or your partner for a long time, and then other weeks, you know, you can live nicely,
You
go on
can live
nice
a bit, yeah,
holidays and
be a bit more
take good
relaxed
rest
about it.
and
Yeah,
be
yeah,
at home and
yeah,
help out, but
yeah.
it's the swings and roundabouts of being in a
I think of, of work generally speaking, because we are office based effectively, and be that office at home or actually in an office, it's still a question of there is time where there's no point in sitting at your desk just to make up the hours, right? There's,
yeah.
what's the point in that? So it's much better sometimes to take that time back yourself. And it might be that you think to yourself, well, actually, I've got half an hour. I can go and look at community stuff and check out what's on in the latest release and see if that impacts me. Or you can go and make your dinner early and spend some time with your partner or your kids or whatever, knowing full well that next week, someone's booked in a 5 o'clock meeting, it's going to run till 6, and you know that it might even go later. I think that's okay to be able to sort of balance those hours, and we're all grown-ups, right?
You've got to have that autonomy of being able to.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
so.
that's a big part of working at home.
Yes,
A big part of
definitely.
working at home is it's not just a 9 to, well, it is a 9 to 5, but it's not.
Yeah,
Typically, like when you work with clients abroad, you're going to have meetings at 7 a.m., 6 a.m., or
yeah,
meetings at 10 p.m. But like you say, you're able to just take that time back and
yeah, exactly.
you know
Yeah,
utilize that elsewhere.
exactly. And know when to, close a laptop or close your office door or whatever, and know when to step away. But it's something I think, it does come a little bit with experience. And I think we're lucky at Foremost because we have sort of, I always say to people, I know that they've got my back in terms of, the management and the C layer, right? Whereas I've worked in organizations before where, sort of the people in charge would happily grind you into the ground because there's always more to do. So, it's a question of trying to find that balance and being able to, sort of stand your ground in these positions, which, particularly when you're a junior, is much harder to do because the boss man's always going to go, okay, I want you to do the extra hours, and or you've got to prove yourself. But I think there are better ways of proving yourself than just being visible all the time for 12 hours a day or whatever. So
I mean, like you say, sitting there and doing things isn't necessarily good for you. I think like say when I did exams and things, I would always implement like if I had a study day, which we're lucky to get. I know a lot of companies wouldn't even offer you
yeah, yeah,
study days to do exams, but when you got a study day and things like that, like you're still gonna have work to do in the day.
yeah,
I think it's good just to balance that between 30 minutes off, an hour then doing work, stop thinking about it,
yeah,
and then go back for it for half an hour. You don't need to always.
yeah. Well, the change is as good as a break, right? I think that's a good sort of. I think myself that yeah, I'm happy if as long as if something's not going well work-wise, I'm thinking, oh great, I'll switch tracks for a little while, and then hopefully my subconscious will start attacking the problem in a different way, and I'll come back to it fresh. So
That's the great thing about the culture, right? Is like I'll get a study day, say, for MB800 or MB230 or whatever it was.
yeah,
Even when I was doing the C stuff and I've done MB210 and things like that, you can do the study day and you don't have to do the exam by
no,
end of day. Or there's no, they're just like do the study day, do what you can, and if you feel comfortable to do the exam, do the exam. When you feel like you can. And I think it's a really good thing not to feel that like pressure or anxious about
yeah, yeah,
oh oh God, like
yeah.
I've got to.
I've got to.
They've given me a study. I need to do it. So if you feel comfortable, get it done.
Mm,
If you don't, just we'll give you another one down the line. Like don't.
yeah, yeah. No, it's important,
If you
isn't it?
can do it, do it. If you don't,
Yeah,
don't. I mean, there's always that balance between you need to progress and
yeah,
not.
yeah,
Feel comfortable and you do always need to be willing to
yeah,
step out of that comfort zone.
well, that's it. I remember one job where I think the first time I'd started doing dynamics, and I started doing a lot of dynamics, and I hadn't had any training per se, but I'd come at it from a web background, so I knew a lot of the technologies, and so I was kind of working it out as I went myself. And there was less blogging and stuff available at the time. We still used to get the MSDN discs through and all that kind of stuff. That's how old-fashioned it was. The service packs. I think you could download service packs for CRM, but then some major releases only came on discs. But the whole point there is that it was sort of you could you could go at it some hard time, and then, but I think I got a couple of training courses in, and the training courses, although I don't think I learned anything new on the training courses, the way in which it was supplied in terms of, you know, the Microsoft training materials and all that kind of stuff gave me time for those ideas to kind of fill out in my mind a little bit. So, you know, there's working on getting experience on the job is great. And when I was a contractor for a long time, I'd say 90% of what I did, I guess, would be on the job learning effectively. Whereas, you know, I don't think it hurts to have training that replays what you already know, but does it in such a way that it's, you know, it grounds it in a slightly better way, and sort of, you know, you're able to take what you know and apply it to that, and then you get a better sort of training experience out of it. So,
And like you mentioned before, right, it's just the validity too. Like sometimes you want to make sure when you're doing something, you stood in front of a client talking about it, saying you can do something. It's good to know
yeah,
when you have those trainers. Oh, I'm right. I can.
yeah, no, I got
Can
it
do that.
right.
It's not
Yeah,
something we've just, you know,
comes out of that thing, right?
done.
You know, oh, right. Was the model I built in my head right? Okay, yeah, no, it was. That fits my model. That's great. Box tick, box tick. The two come together, and hopefully I've learned something. So, yeah, really important.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. I mean, talking about CRM and BC, I mean, there's a. I mean, do you ever use field service in CE?
Been a while since I've used field service, yeah, but yeah, it's
Made it a lot easier to integrate field service in CE and
okay.
service module in BC. So
Okay, that
not
fits.
played around with it massively. We've recently done a service
Right.
implementation, which is upsetting because it would have been nice to, you know, use the integration between CE and BC. But these things happen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where it's only just come out in release notes and
Oh, has it?
we
Okay.
finished the project already. So
And now everyone's going, oh, I wonder if we need to try and push that into the whole system in
yeah,
the
I mean,
end.
they use a CRM system that isn't currently dynamic, so
Okay,
there's
so
still a
less
potential for.
prefer, yeah, being able to switch across. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's
yeah,
always nice. Look for maybe a phase 2 or a bit of CI down the line.
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
CI being continuous improvement. I'm not sure if that's an industry standard. Obviously, I know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah,
That's what we call it.
CI/CD, I suppose, is generally sort of the term is kicked around in terms of release management and things like that. So, and ALM, application lifecycle management. So, lots of acronyms. God, we talked about this before, haven't we? Lots of acronyms. I've got a few acronyms here in terms of I've written down different things. I've got CE, CO, PP, and sales. So,
Sales
CE,
being an acronym.
sales is less of an acronym, but it would be CRM sales.
Oh, right,
But
okay.
but what do you think CO stands for?
CO. Is this a little quiz?
It's a little quiz.
Sit up for this. I like
Set up. You like a quiz, do you?
quite competitive. So quizzes.
So what do you
Up my
think?
street.
Okay, it's something actually I already mentioned. Data first tables in something studio.
CoPilot.
CoPilot.
That's what CO stands for.
Oh, it was as good as acronym as anything. I suppose I could have put CP,
I
right?
think CP would have been
Maybe that would have worked. When you
together.
type Copilot in an email or something like that, most of the time, if you write Copilot all one word, which is how it appears in a lot of the Microsoft docs, you get a little red wiggle under it because it wants it to be co-pilot, which is so. And I sometimes and I've seen people in LinkedIn posts go, well, it's really important to get this kind of stuff right. And I'm like, is it? Generally, as long as the context around it makes sense, that's how you make sense of words. Even AI can do that, for goodness sake, a large language model. So is that a big deal? I don't know. Questions for you. So some other neat stuff that's come up. I've got at the top here, CE,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, really,
CRM.
it's probably, yeah, I've written it as CE, but it's definitely a Power Platform thing. Secure data access with filtered views. So we've talked about security on the blog before. They're going to change. You can have secured views that can actually read the data. So it's a lot like a SQL thing. So you can have row level security in SQL, and we have row level security in CE. And now at least it's going to be in preview. You can actually say, if, for example, country code equals, ENGB, for example, then you can attach that to a security role again, and you can either have access or deny access based upon the data rather than where it sits within the rest of the data model.
That's good. So in theory, you could, like a use case of it is if you've got a massive HR team
Yeah.
cross borders. You could lock
Yeah.
down to the HR in, let's say, India or
Well, I'd have thought, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where people use that because traditionally you've had business units, and
yeah,
I
true.
would have thought you'd have a business unit, one for your HR department in India, perhaps, and your HR department in the UK, and that the actual records would belong to those business units or teams within those business units, and so consequently, that would act as your security gateway.
I
Um,
guess then if you're querying CoPilot, is there not a
yeah.
would there be a potential using business units that CoPilot would creep out of?
It would depend on how it's configured. So, if you were driving the co-pilot as yourself, so that was to say you're inside of a Entra ID boundary, then the co-pilot, if it knows who you are and it's using your security, then it should then be able to use those business units in the appropriate way. Um, and that comes out. So there was at this AI thing last week, somebody was saying, oh, they're starting to see people using Copilot with service accounts. And she was very much against the use of service accounts. And I was thinking to myself, well, I suppose within an Entra ID boundary, that makes sense because you'd want to know who it is because then there's knock-ons in terms of what's recorded into things like Purview, which is a security tool available in Microsoft. If it was a service account, then it would only ever do what the service account has access to. Whereas it might be, is the requirement behind the use of a co-pilot that it actually sees what you see? But I suppose these are all kind of solution architecture questions, really.
So those things where, it goes back to, all right, like if you don't configure this in the right way, then they've got access to anything.
They've got
That's the issue
access.
with service accounts is
Yeah,
if it's for a general role, they've got to see a lot more than what a
yeah,
specific user would
yeah,
maybe perhaps be limited to
yeah.
if it
And
weren't a security
that's
role.
true. And that's it, I guess, if your service account, because more often than not, service accounts tend to have fairly high-powered, you know, they can do deletions and things like that. And when I'm doing ordinarily, Dynamics projects, sort of, I don't give anybody deletion rights. I just say to them, no, your record becomes, sort of, I change its status, deactivate it effectively as a means. And so we don't ever throw data away or lose data. And, that coupled hopefully with audit means that you've got a great handle on which to, you've got a nice data set where you can actually go, okay, this item still occurs, and I can then report on it in the appropriate way as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the difference with BC, right? When it's been transacted against, it can't be removed anyway.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then if it hasn't been transacted against, there's no
yeah,
downside to getting rid of it.
yeah,
So it's a lot easier
yeah,
security-wise to.
yeah. Interesting. Yeah, the whole idea of you could of course you could create your service account so it doesn't have deletion rights. That would be the much more sensible way of doing it. But I know, depending upon how the project's been put together and how much time is generally available, these things sometimes do happen. I've
So
seen
then
it happen.
also a licensing issue at the service account that multiple users are going to be using it.
Depends on how it's been done, really. So you can use. I blogged about this a couple of months ago, actually. Service principal name, and it really depends on who's going to view that data. So there's an argument about multiplexing in CE. So rather than writing to Dataverse, for example, and having to worry about Dataverse sizes and things like that, you could write your data into a SharePoint list, and you get an awful lot of people talking about, and I know more SharePoint jockeys like doing that kind of thing. Obviously, a SharePoint list, I think at the end of the day, it probably does all boil down into a SQL type database eventually. But I think you have to be, you know, to answer your question, you can buy specific Power Automate licenses which cover off multiple flows in order to sort of to not to dodge multiplexing, but in order to say, okay, yes, I think this data. So we were writing to a third-party portal, and so I could have used user flows, or the standard service principle, but I knew that this data realistically was being viewed by lots of other people, and so it made sense to go, okay, no, this flow is, effectively talking to the outside world, and so from a licensing perspective, it should be covered by a broader license, effectively. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, haven't we?
Yeah, licensing
Yeah.
is one of those complex,
It's complicated, but at the end of
and
the
it
day,
also
I'm always like,
changes
yeah,
all the time
it does change a lot,
between
right?
pricing, what it gives you, the perks, the
Perks,
downsides.
yeah.
Um,
I saw in CoPilot licensing. So CoPilot agents, they have they have things called actions, where you can basically talk to a Power Automate flow or to a custom connector. Um, and what you pay for is things called messages. And so if you make a query to a Copilot and it's not talking to an action, that I think is either one or two messages. And those messages, you get 1,000 messages for, I don't know, $500 or something like that. If you call an action that's backed by a custom connector or a Power Automate, then it actually costs you 25 messages.
it's a lot more
So it
expensive.
becomes a lot more expensive. So suddenly, if you're, say trying to talk to a Power Automate flow that's hiding a certain amount or giving a certain amount of business logic up to your Copilot agent, then potentially it's going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, but this relates back to what we were saying originally, right? Where we started this whole talk is it goes back to needing to know
Yeah.
what's coming out. Because if
What's
you
coming?
didn't know that, I'd go in, maybe do it with a
Yeah.
custom connector because that's how I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm actually costing the client a lot more money
Yeah.
subsequently due to lack of knowledge, which is where you constantly do need to keep up to date.
You do have to stay up to date. And I should think a lot of this stuff is going to change over the next, with the recent release of, the Chinese AI there,
Mm.
suddenly I imagine there's going to be a lot of organizations going, oh, hang on, do we need to be paying this much to use AI? Can we use other AI services? Can they be cheaper? So, we'll look back in a few months and we'll see which way the market's gone.
It all comes down to, well,
Will it all come down to cost?
security, I guess.
Security is the other thing.
I mean, you
Yeah.
know, I don't know the specifics around this, but like Huawei, are a lot cheaper
Yes.
alternatives, yet they're definitely not a primary use, especially in the UK anyway.
No, they got
It's
into
not,
real trouble, didn't they?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely not a primary market, so cost probably isn't going to be, I wouldn't imagine, the
No.
biggest driver of
No, and it'll be interesting to see
choice.
with the government putting a lot more money into saying they're going to back AI a bit more, what's going to happen there in terms of, is there going to be an insistence upon sustainability, for example? So, we mentioned, didn't we, in a previous one, that in BC there's now a sustainability sort
Yes,
of log, as it were.
improved with the new release wave as well. Got
Yeah.
greenhouse gas tables and things like that, so you're able to track more.
Right.
I mean, there's not really yet a use of those tables, but you're able to still
But I wonder
track
whether or not
those.
it's going to turn in on itself, and whether or not, sort of, so within the Power Platform admin tool, there's lots of stuff about, how much data you use, and so you can work out your costs and that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
But I wonder at one point whether or not there's going to become a CO2 meter. If I'm using a lot of AI, for example, does that mean I've got a number the other day from when I was putting together a blog, and they were saying that a task, and it was a little bit difficult to work out exactly what a task was, but it was, 700 grams of CO2. And so it was like, hang on. So if every time you're talking to an AI, it's costing you, in terms of CO2, the equivalent of, a tank of petrol or something like that. Is that suddenly, our customers going to get switched onto that? Are they suddenly going to start going, well, hang on, we don't want to do that?
Also, there's a complicit cost, right? I mean, nowadays it's a massive thing to be carbon neutral and green, and a lot of these companies do that by buying credits, right?
Yeah.
So if they're going to have to offset that cost of using AI and the amount it's queried, with a kilo of, there or thereabouts of
Yeah,
CO2
CO2,
being
yeah.
released, and then they're going to have to buy credits to offset that use,
Yeah.
is there then not going to be a substantial cost outside of the whole implementation and initial
Yeah.
licensing of Copilot and
Yeah.
their or
Absolutely.
similar products?
You buy a flight these days, right? Comes up generally with, it's this
Hmm.
lowest CO2 or something like that. And a lot of airlines then say, hey, do you want to pay a little bit extra to offset that cost? And I wonder if IT will go that way, or things generally,
Yeah, instead of it being cost, this is the least
Yeah, the least.
planet-killing AI
Yeah.
there is.
God. Yeah.
No, but I don't know. It's very tough because, like you say, IT in general isn't the most sustainable
No, but I guess we've got to a
industry.
point now, the industry itself, you can't switch all this stuff off anymore, right? No one wants to go back to paper and pen, right?
I guess
Or,
it killed the planet more.
yeah, well, exactly. I'm sure there's probably a number of arguments out there that go, well, hang on, if you're storing a million records, in a Dataverse database, it's certainly a hell of a lot less CO2 damage than producing paper, producing ink, storing it somewhere where there has to be an individual that has to go and do stuff and heat the building so the paper doesn't rot, all that kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to see which direction it goes in.
Yeah, I mean, I know you wanted to talk a bit more about community and that engaging in the community and how I know we've already related this previously in a blog and how important we both think contributing is. I just wanted to talk to you more about, do you ever feel the requirement to like
Yeah,
the not that you owe it to the community, because obviously you don't, right?
no.
But where you get quite deep in community, you're then like, oh, I'm responsible for
Yeah.
providing knowledge or going to these talks or that kind of.
I don't think so because, I suppose it depends on so bits of community, the more I know the community, the people in the community, then I think if they're happy to hear me talk, then I'd go along and talk. I suppose if there came a point where, no one was showing up to my talks or engaging with me, then I'd be thinking, well, what's the point in doing this? I think I've been, you know, quite lucky to know a lot of the recent cohort, the MVP cohort, and it's great, and they've been really lovely in terms of going, okay, Phil, what you're saying makes sense. Um, but I don't think I feel beholden. But I think it's like all things, right? Do it if you enjoy it, and I think that goes for work as well. If you in an organisation where your boss is mean to you and he's cracking the whip the whole time and you're not enjoying it, then get out. Community is the same. If you're doing it and you're feeling beholden or that this is onerous, then I guess it's up to you to take your foot off the pedal a little bit. But it's easier said than done. I think, I suppose it's easy to become drawn in, to most things in life, right? I don't know so what do you do outside of work?
A lot, whether it's trade.
You do, don't you? Do a lot of,
Yeah, a lot of trading of commodities and that side of things. Trying to build
yeah,
a
the
house.
house. I know you're into cars as well.
Yeah, cars is definitely on the back foot
Yeah.
when you've got costs like building a house.
Yes.
But
But it's a balancing act, right? Ultimately, because straight away, so that's great, right? Because instantly I'm thinking, great, he knows how to balance stuff. And I know in the past we talked about things where you said, okay, I'm doing less of this because I'm busier elsewhere. And I think not everybody is always capable of turning down the wick a little bit.
yeah, I mean, it makes you anxious, right? Like you've got to, you're looking at a plate that you've got too much on.
Yeah.
Referring to the biscuits, I'm looking at, really
Yes.
withholding myself off.
Let me
Just rub it
let
in,
me
right?
lighten that load for you. Yeah.
It is difficult, right? Like
Yeah.
you say, and as I said earlier, you've got to. Sometimes there's that work-life balance you're trying to, manage the variance on, and it's like where are you meant to turn it down at what point? There's
Yeah.
no one telling you that. Oh, it's right. You can, take the pedal off work for a minute,
Yeah.
not progress as quickly
Yeah.
because you're doing other things, or
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you haven't got a family. Should you focus on that? Because in life,
Yeah.
that's
Is
a
that where you
massive
want it?
part of life. Like,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a difficult one.
yeah, it's one of those. You've probably got it too, right? Where it's like you want to go see your parents or towards parents more, or spend more time with your kids, or
Yeah.
but it's like, what do you want to do? And then if you say you did want to move house or one of those things, or move job or whatever it is, like in life, it's what do you? I mean, it's a life conundrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where like you say, you've got to turn that dial at some point,
Yeah.
and you've got to just do what you enjoy, but also at the forefront of your mind, understand the consequences of turning it down in other
Yeah.
departments. Like I know if I'm focusing on the house and trading, work's going to take a back front, or my relationships with people are going to take a back foot.
Yeah, while you're doing that.
You know, and if you're focusing on enjoying life and building relationships with people in the community or in life in general,
Then
then
something else has got
then
to
the other
give,
things are
right?
going to have to take the back foot. It's just about
Yeah,
what you're prioritising at that certain point in life. And
yeah,
I think it's the same with community, where you can, you know, contribute loads, but it's good to remember that you can turn that dial
yeah. You're
back
not
the other way.
beholden,
You're
right?
not,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
reliant. That no one's reliant on you
Yeah,
to do
exactly.
those things. And you know, the community, it's always harder to ask for help than you think.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important to make sure you've got, you know, it might be that your friend group might be some people that you don't feel you can talk to this about, but I think there are certainly parts of the community where it's become much more okay to talk about this stuff, and I think you'd get a number of people, from the community if you were to reach out and say this is killing me or whatever, and they'd say, well, look, health comes first, right? Surely, at the end of the day, everything is boils down to that. So, and you could that's certainly you have to come first, I think.
Well, that's it. Because it's one of the things I'm conscious of, right? Like I want to, you know, I see you doing all these talks and
Right.
going to more events, and I'm like, wow, I'd love to join, Phil. But it's like, I'm just very
That's,
conscious of, I don't know if I could, like I say, mentally or even in
oh,
time
right.
wise, donate that time
Yeah, yeah,
to the community currently. You know, something I've looked to do, but right now, is it something that,
yeah,
you know, you can do? And then you're like, should I be doing it?
yeah,
Like you say, you shouldn't ever you know, feel,
yeah. Beholden,
yeah.
as such.
But it's one of
Yeah,
those, right? Like you look at it and you're like, oh, I wish I was doing that. That looks
yeah,
really
yeah.
fun.
Well,
And
that's the thing, isn't
yeah.
it? And I guess it's that fear of missing out really that drives a lot of that kind of anxiety
Mm.
about what am I doing? Am I doing enough at work? Am I doing enough at life? Can I try and do it all? And yeah, it's very easy just to get drawn. And I think, I think anybody who's in community and they're feeling any of this stuff, I'd say to them, if you've already got into community, then chances are you're probably pretty good at your job anyway. So I'd argue that, because, if you're turning up to learn more about something and it's, from the community, then chances are you've already spent the time and effort discussing and finding out the community and then showing up to someone's talk. You've looked at what they're going to talk about and you thought, oh, okay, that might interest me or it might not interest me. And you've shown up. Whereas, there's a lot of people here in our industry who are not involved in community. And it might be that their thing is exams or something instead. Or basically, you know, they show up 9 to 5. And I think that's okay as well. I think it's definitely worth putting out on the record that, if you're not doing community, don't feel that, oh God, I have to go and do
Yeah, don't feel
community.
obliged to do
No,
it. Like if it's not for you, it's not for
if it's
you.
not for you, it's not for
You know,
you.
and the good thing is there are plenty of people that are helping.
Exactly. But I think we said this before. It's always worth giving community a go and thinking, well, and it might well be you do discover, well, actually, they're a nice bunch of people, or I've learned something new, and if that's your limit, then great. And if you want to go a little bit more lucky enough to have those talks accepted and stuff. Um, but yeah, there was probably a good 18 months of when I was putting out, sort of saying, can I do this session? And people weren't being interested, and I was like, oh, do I want to get involved then if they're not interested? So, we all get those feelings. It's worth sort of kicking them around in your head or discussing them with your friends and family. Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is like sometimes you're like, oh, I've seen them at events and we've had a few drinks and we've had a laugh and we've had a great night out here, or
Yeah.
you know, like Scottish Summit. You know,
Yeah.
you're on their
Absolutely.
quiz team. You know, you have a good laugh, and you have a chat, you have a meal. You know, you build that friendship, but like you don't know whether that's. Say you did feel anxious, you don't know whether you can reach out to them because it's like, do I know them?
Well enough.
Yeah, well enough to discuss it, because you can't
Yeah.
always go to your friend group because I'm not sure about you, but none of my
None
friends
of my friends know anything about
know anything
IT
about
particularly.
dynamics.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I'm an ERP consultant. I mean, I don't know anyone else that is an ERP
Yeah.
consultant
No.
that I would reach out to
No.
specifically to talk
Certainly
about it.
your age group, right?
Well, that's it. Yeah, like
Yeah.
you don't always want to go to colleagues because that's just a bit
Yeah. I'm always.
pressuresome.
Yeah.
Depending on, obviously, I know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, depending on how long you've been there and your relationships with them. But it's like, I don't know. You got to be realistic. But no,
Yeah.
it is one of those things where like, who do you chat to?
Who do you chat to? Well, it's funny, is so James, who's also behind the camera, asked us to put out some talk a couple of years ago, and he was very bemused. And one of the things was I said, at Formus, I said, we have a no policy. And I've used this with agents before. I've gone to them and said, are there any people there who, I wouldn't want to work with? And agents more often than not are very surprised that you're asking these questions. Because generally as a contractor, it was always like, well,
What's the pay?
what's the pay? So they were always, surprised. But, I think it's important. Again, it comes back to the kind of people you want to surround yourself with. And I think certainly the older I've got, I mean, when I was younger, I think I wouldn't have cared so much. If I had to work with difficult people or whatever, I'd have gone, well, whatever. I'm going drinking at the weekend with the money. Whereas I think the older I get, the more likely I am to say, well, I'd rather work with nice people than work with people who want to make life difficult. And there are certainly characters out there who do seem to thrive on that sort of energy. And then you've got to make that choice. Okay, do I want to hang out with people like that? Or do I want to sort of, hang out with people who make me feel better about myself? So,
Yeah, I mean, I do love that policy we've got.
yeah.
Like you say, as we got bigger, I don't know everyone now. So,
Yeah.
well, that still applies. I actually couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I think so. Sort of in nearly all of my conversations, and whenever I have had difficulties with individuals, generally I can go and have a word with that individual now. And I think that also maybe comes with being older, is that it's easier to stand up for yourself, I think, when you're older. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah,
You're always quite...
I don't know. It's one of those where I'm quite outspoken anyway. So
yeah.
it's probably a bit different. I don't know.
Yeah.
If I don't agree with something, I'll say it.
Just say, yeah.
But I've always been taught to do that. Like, if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't tell, they don't know. That's the...
Yeah. But there'll be lots of people in the industry who are a little bit quieter and won't.
A lot of people. Tech is generally
yeah.
a quieter environment.
Yeah, people who I used to sell myself sometimes to agents as a tech person who can look you in the eye when they're talking. Because I remember my wife coming to meet me for drinks at something 20 years ago, and she went, "None of your colleagues could look me in the eye, none of them." And we were quite a tech-heavy department, and I was always like, "Oh, no, I'm sure they can." And she was going, "No, they couldn't." And so it's and I dare say they wouldn't say boo to a goose. We had quite a tough manager at the time. And I remember handing my notice in there and being slightly terrified. At one point he said, so, I just moved house. And he was like, so, we're thinking of sending you on this training course. And I went, let me stop you there. I said, I'm afraid I'm going to be handing my notice in. And he was a big American gentleman with a big walrus moustache. Yeah, and he frowned at me, and I did sort of for a moment thinking about cracking under the pressure of that look, but I didn't, and I left the job. But yeah, it's not always easy to stand up and express your opinion. Sometimes it's easier just to go with the flow, isn't it?
Well, it's definitely easier to go with the flow, but then it's not, right. Like, if you've got to compare, they always say it's hard not doing something, but wait till you get the cost of not doing something is tough, but wait till you get the bill of regret, something like that.
Wow, that's
probably
a good one.
probably butchered that quite hard, but it's like you
no,
say,
I like it.
if you've got to stay somewhere for 2 years or 3 years because you're just
Going
scared of,
change
scared of change or whatever it is, and you don't stand up for yourself, and you just have to live in that misery for, I mean, that sounds quite depressing.
Absolutely.
But no. If you're unhappy for a long stint of time, it's a lot worse than just jumping out your comfort zone for, those 5 minutes handing in your notice or whatever it is. Having that half an hour of, ooh.
Yeah, breaking it, yeah.
Yeah, because, I don't know, it's short term versus long term, right? You've always got to, like, say, health is more important than anything else.
Yeah.
And you've always got to choose you, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
sort of you and your family are always more important than any work or
exactly
anything else you can come up against. So it's always good just to, if you're anxious or even unwell, like I know a lot of people have gone to events feeling ill or, I mean, I made a few good friends. We went to Manchester and, I know one of them turned up at Scottish Summit because he did not want to be there. He was in his hotel for 2 days because he was ill.
That's awful, isn't
right?
it? Yeah,
I mean, he just loves it, right? That's why he went.
Yeah.
And he was more upset that he was ill, but it's just one of those things, right? Just pick health over anything else. And I think it's very important to focus on in our industry because working from home, it's very easy not to talk to anyone.
Yeah, and get lost and then get swept up in terms of, we want you to do this.
Yeah,
and go, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then thinking, oh my God, I don't know how to do that. How do I deal with that? Yeah.
Senior or not, juniors.
Junior, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I find it easier to ask because I'm a junior.
Yeah. I don't have a, yeah, I suppose it's just, I wonder if there's certainly an element of the older I've got, the easier I've found it is to say, I don't care what you say, I want to do this. That's not to say I'm an awkward, but we might have to beat that out as well. But, it's easier to get to a certain point in your life and go, hang on, what am I doing here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much wraps it up, right? I think it's
I think so. I think
good
we've,
to note on health is wealth
yeah,
at the end of the day.
absolutely. And what was that? Was what's something about regret and
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to butcher it again, probably.
cool.
So let's just put it out there. This is definitely not the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of, it's a high cost for not saying something, but wait until you get the bill for regret.
The bill for regret.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is always going to be a lot more.
absolutely.
But it's something along those lines. I mean, don't hold me to that ever. But
No, I thought that's great.
it's something along those lines. But I think that's a really important note to end on. And
Yeah, definitely.
just enjoy life, right? I mean, focus on work, try and help the community, but more than anything, just focus on
on where you are and being happy.
Yeah, where you are. That's it.
Yeah, where you are and being happy, I think.
And you can always write that down in your trusty Formus Pro notepads.
Exactly.
Mine's nice.
Or draw a little. It is. I was thinking about doing a few stickman or something on that one, but. All right. So thanks very much for your time today, mate.
I'll see you soon.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.